on Twitch, and be sure to send it in the Twitch because that's what I'm going to be looking at. So yeah, last time we set up this template and we got kind of this melody worked out. The next thing I'm going to do is really get the track arranged before going too far forward. So with that is what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find this reference track. And the track I'm using is Shantaya's Turbo. Great track. And one of the things I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to give this its own mixer track, which will be the reference. And one of the reasons I like having this here, and I'm actually going to move this all the way to the other side, the reason I like also having this is not only can this be like a reference track for arrangement, but it can also be a good track for mixing if you like the way the song is mixed. So having that there is really good, and that's why I'm turning this fader down to maybe -6 or so, because that's where I'm going to be trying to hit. You don't want this to just be way louder or way softer, then you're not getting an accurate mix with your reference track. So actually the original of this track is at I think 140 beats per minute, and I'm working at 138. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually time stretch this to be the tempo that I want it to be. So I'm going to click auto detect, and I'm actually going to type in the beats per minute as 140. And of course my chat keeps going away, which is really annoying. I don't know how I'm going to fix that. I mean, I guess I could shrink this window down. But that's what I'll have to do. Whoops. That wasn't the way to do it. Oh well, I'll just check it occasionally, and if I hear a notification, I will check it. So, as you can see now, things are a little bit better lined up. You have the kick drums going every beat. So really with this reference track, what I'm going to try to do is match the kick drum pattern, and you can kind of see based on these sections here what's going on. So starting out, and I'm going to add markers here in FL to kind of let me know what's going on and where I'm going to be adding things. So the first marker we want to have is right here at the beginning. So I'm going to go to time markers, add one, and this is just going to be like the start of the track. So as you notice, bar 17, something's going in. So really what's probably going on is here at the beginning, and maybe I'll play a little bit, the kick is going to come in high pass, and then the high pass filter will drop out, and the kick will be in full blast. And then here, starting at bar 33, this is when a sub will come in. So I'm going to add that marker there. So if we take a listen. So you can see here that the kick's kind of high pass. So that effect would just be me, as I made all these filters last time, as opposed to. So then here, bar 17, the kick probably comes in at full strength. So as you can hear it, and then here at bar 33 is when the sub is going to come in. So then there's like some melody that gets added in, and then the next thing I'm looking at here is this is probably where the breakdown starts. I'm going to add that. So here at 121 is what I'm going to do is I'm going to add sort of the melody. The main melody is going to come in here at bar 121. So the breakdown starts, there's kind of this little bit of silence, and then there's kind of a little bit of a melody that comes in, but it doesn't really come in like all the way until here. And then here at bar 137, this is really where the build-up happens. The build-up starts going, and then over here at bar 153, this is the main drop, so this is when the bass and the sub come in and all the drums and everything. Then is what's going to happen here at bar 185, is this is where things start getting, I sometimes call this the filter out. It's kind of like a second breakdown or a bridge. So what you'll hear going on here is the kick may still be going for half of it, but then the kick will come out and it kind of gets ready for the outro, which will probably start here at bar 201. So. So as you can tell, the outro does start at bar 201, and really this filter out, I mean, really in all actuality, by looking at the waveform here, and maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger, maybe it more accurately starts here at 193, but the way to think about this is this bar is going to work in kind of two 16-bar sections. So the first 16-bar section, there's probably going to be some, the main melody and all the drums and everything coming in. And then the second part, they'll probably add something. And then the only reason this isn't 16 bars is to sort of keep these chunks to be 32, 32, 32. So the first half is probably going to be pretty similar to this, maybe with something else added in. And then we start filtering out the kick and taking the bass down. And then for the outro. So as you can tell here, the track does end at 2:49, and in FL I have this set up so I can actually see the time. So if you see the measures and stuff, you can just click on it to see the time. So this song's about 7 minutes long, which is pretty standard for a club mix. And one of the things I will mention too before going too much further is this is probably where the sub comes out. So as you can see, things are filtered out, and then here, because this is the kick, there's no sub here as you would otherwise see, like here. So here's the kick in this area, and then here's the sub, whereas over here, here's the kick, and there's not really a sub there. So this is all high frequency. So you can tell by the actual wavelength by eyeballing it. So here. So no sub here, and then of course the track ends. So to kind of give an example of what's going on here at the drop, we have So what's going on here is pretty standard, and then the clap doesn't come in until the second 8 bars. And then here, when we start the next 16, there's probably going to be a piano or something that gets added in. So there's a lead and the open hats actually. So there's no open hats here on the offbeats, but here. So this kind of lower or grittier lead kind of comes in at this part, and then at this point, piano comes in, and then the piano is probably going to stay as the kick comes out. So yeah, that's kind of the basic structure. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this kick, and I'm really just going to kind of emulate what's going on here, just following the pattern. I'm not going to do it exactly the same because I'm going to have some creativity. So as you can see here, the kick actually drops out for this last section of 8. So this is kind of like a kick roll, so maybe is what I'll do here is I'll just kind of add this, make this unique, and then what I'm going to do is call this kick roll 1, and this is where we'll kind of do something fun, maybe for now, just something very simple, and we'll come back to this later. So what this would sound like is And obviously with some filters and changing the pitch and, taking some below end out, that'll sound really cool and give a lot of energy for when the sub really comes in. And one thing you'll find very often is at the end of every set of 16 or 20 or really 16 or 32 bars, there'll be points where the kick is dropped out, and sometimes even the bass line. So if you hear here this last bar, so there's a little kick roll here, but there's no sub, there's no really bass line, just kind of, it's like a little fill, I guess is the best way to call it. So kind of moving on here, you can hear kind of what's like another little kick roll. So once again, another one of those, and then the kick continues. It looks to be another roll here. So another thing I'm going to mention here is that this part of the intro, this is really where the chords start changing. So there's a word for what ends up happening here, and I'm forgetting what it is. It's a music theory term, but what's going to happen is sub comes in here, probably no melody. Melody starts coming in here. The melody starts coming in here and changing, whereas like here it's probably doing something, I don't want to say more boring, but more simple. But it's changing while the chords underneath it are not. And that kind of creates a little bit of tension. It's like teasing what the melody is. And then what you start hearing here is the actual full melody, or maybe a stripped back version of the melody with the chords changing underneath it, which is a little bit of release. And then you have the breakdown. So once again, nothing... no kicks there, and then this is where the kick roll is probably going to start. So I will go ahead and do this, and oops. So the keyboard shortcut for like duplicating a selection after you've selected it is Command B on Mac and Control B on Windows. So that's what I did. It took this 8-bar loop and just kind of duplicated it over to 16 bars. So that's going to happen there, and then what I'm going to do is drag these guys over here for the main drop. And right now I'm going to follow the pattern that this is doing, except, but maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I'll only want to have like an 8-bar fade out without this other 8 bars here. So this whole section would be 8 bars and just cutting this off. So we'll see if that's kind of what I feel like doing. And then, of course, the outro starts. Once again, these last 2 kicks or actually these last 4. Totally wrong. The last 3 are gone. The first one hits. That's kind of what's going on here. And once again, you want to change the sub so you're not just copying this other track, but it's kind of good to get an idea. And once again, the kick's going to be here, but the sub isn't. So that's why I mentioned the sub out. So at this point, we've actually arranged the kick. And at this point, I'm actually going to start arranging the sub bass. And that's usually when this starts coming together. So as you can tell, this is going to come in at bar 33. And I'm just going to call this sub bass 1 and give it a color. And as you can kind of tell, I like kind of having these things in what are like 8-bar chunks. It just makes it a little bit easy to kind of use these as sort of what I like to consider Lego blocks and build your song together. So if everything's 8 bars, you can kind of, even though it's, in theory this pattern could really only be like 1 or 4 long, like 1 bar long, having it be like 8 bars is like really easy because then you kind of get more macro control over your song and you're not really messing things up as much when you're moving things around because, otherwise you can have all sorts of weird stuff go on. So that's kind of my 2 cents, but you don't have to do it that way, just the way it works for me. So taking this sub, and what this sub is all this, all it is this simple silent patch. It's just 8 stacked saw waves and 8 stacked square waves. But what's going on here is here in the mixer channel, it's being filtered. So first, without anything, super brittle, super high. So this first filter is doing, this parametric EQ2 is doing just a simple high cut or low pass. Really helps it. And then we got the waves R bass, which is like honestly one of the best things ever. So there's that, and then after that is another parametric EQ, and this is to boost the fundamental. So right now we haven't decided what key, well we kind of have, you're thinking about G, so whatever key this track's in is going to depend on what settings we have for the R bass and where this boost is. So I'm actually going to leave it off right now. But once again, all this is, I mean, super simple. It's just 8 saw waves stacked with the retrigger on, 8 pulse waves stacked with retrigger on. That way they're not drifting all over the place. You don't want detune on or anything. And then, yeah, it's going from there. So what I'm going to do is, so just to make sure, I think this melody that we made last time was in the key of G minor. As you can see, yeah, G minor. So G is going to be our root note, so that's generally what you would want to pick for your sub bass. So coming over here, finding the G that works. And this is a good note. And usually I like trimming off a little bit at the end because you don't want it triggering over the kick, because you want to have your kick fill up these first 2 counts and then your sub bass kind of filling up over here. So to kind of duplicate this guy out, so I have 8 bars of this, and this is just going to be super simple, and that comes in bar 33, so I'll just kind of fill this out throughout the rest of the track. So while I do this, I want to do processing on this sub bass so that we get kind of the right tone. And what you're really trying to go for is you really want it to kind of rumble and shake, and certain keys are better for getting that effect than others. So a key like A minor with low note at 55 hertz or 54, that's really nice. I mean, it's like a perfect note. G is not bad either. So I'm going to play with this frequency until I really find what sounds to be right. And what you're trying to go for is you want it to be nice and deep, and you want it to rumble and shake, but you also want to have some of those upper harmonics too, because if somebody's listening to this on laptop speakers or on their computer in their car that may not have a nice club style system, what'll end up happening is it just won't, you won't hear it at all. Whereas, you know, you may feel it when you're in a club system, but you also want to be able to kind of hear the upper harmonics. So that's kind of what I'm doing with this guy. I actually think 60 sounds pretty nice, and this last one is what I'm going to do is boost up the fundamental a little bit, and we're going to sweep around and find where that is. So there it is. So now at this time, what I'm going to do is arrange the sub throughout the rest of the track. Once again, not really being super picky about it, because this is likely something that's going to change when this arrangement actually gets to be more complicated, but really just trying to get this whole thing laid out. And then at this point is what's going to happen is this is probably where the chords are going to change, which is why I'm duplicating this and making it unique. And chances are that's actually going to happen over here as well. This may end up, depending on what the chord progression is, may end up being 16 bars long as opposed to just 8. So we'll see. And then once the outro starts, we're going to take the original sub bass here, because we're just going to be having it be the same note. That way the DJ who's mixing it out can mix it out pretty easy. So as you can see, that part stayed there. And then this is when the sub pops out, so there's no sub in this last 16 bars. And yeah, then there's the end of the track. So at this point, what I'm really going to try to do is work to get the kick and the sub working together really nicely. That way they're playing off of each other. And that may involve changing the kick sample and doing a little bit of compression on the bus. We'll see. In fact, both of these guys are routed to this kick and bass bus, which I want to have on the other side. Here it is. Make sure nobody has been chatting me. Okay, cool. So, moving along. Now, sometimes people use some rules like your sub should be peaking at -3 dBFS below your kick. So if your kick was peaking at 8 dB or -8 dB, I should say. I'm sorry. Then your sub should be peaking at like minus whatever 8 minus 8 minus 3 is, so like minus 11 dB would be the case. I don't know, I used to follow that, but now I think you kind of should just do it by ear. And really what you want to do is you want to have it so that when you mute the sub bass from your kick doesn't, I guess, let me say it this way. You don't want to have it that your sub bass from your kick disappears when you add your sub, because that means there's too much and these are overlapping. But you also want to have your sub loud enough that it's really able to cut through the mix, because that's really going to add a lot of foundation to your track as well. So just playing with these levels is good, and every time you change the sample, it's going to change what the mix is. So it is what it is. So I may go around and try to find some kicks that I like and find one that I think works really well. Some really good ones are the Shantae's pack from Freshly Squeezed samples. Pretty much anything from Freshly Squeezed samples is going to be good, and you can just find all sorts of stuff. Sometimes I synthesize my own, sometimes I find, two from a sample pack, take the high end out of one and the low end from another. It really just depends. So here are the Shantae's kicks. Oh, that's nice. I like that a lot. So, what it is right now, so hearing that with the sub, and that's why it's good to do your sub first and then use your kick, because sometimes they won't play off of each other super well. So I really want something a little bit tighter than that last one I sampled. This one's actually pretty nice, and this may be close enough to what I'm going for. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of equalization on this kick to just kind of tighten up, get rid of a little bit of the boominess. So one of the things I actually learned from Shantae's was he likes boosting his kicks at around 100 to 200 hertz, or actually, sorry, dipping the EQ around there, just to kind of, he thinks it takes away some of the boxiness, and I agree with him. I've been doing that ever since then, because it's one of those things you wouldn't think to necessarily cut there, and when you do, it sounds like something's missing. But when you hear it with fresh ears without having heard what it was before, it actually sounds better. So this is with the cut. To me, it just sounds better. It just sounds not as woody. And then one of the things I often like to do is boost the high frequency with the kind of the high shelf here. So just to really make sure your kick cuts through the mix. So one of the things I don't like about this kick is that it's actually not a stereo kick. So as you can see, one of the channels is louder than the other, which means that it's not completely in mono. So obviously you want the low end of your kick and your sub to be completely in mono. But the top end, it doesn't always matter as much. Some people are like, you should always sum your kicks to mono. I don't necessarily think you necessarily have to do that, but it can be a good idea. See, to me that sounds better, but what's ending up happening is the low end there is kind of disappearing a little bit. So I think panning that a little bit might fix it a little bit. I'm trying to, obviously here it doesn't show me both left and right channels, but I think to me that sounds a little bit more balanced, and maybe when the track is completely built up, we'll come back to that and see what's going on. But for now, I think this is a good start. Having your kick and bass kind of laid out throughout the entire track. So the next thing I think it's good to work on is getting your percussion or getting your groove down, and the place I like to start with that is also bar 33, even if that's not where I'm going to have all that percussion, is what I like doing is building up a full kind of percussion groove starting at bar 33, and then from there you can strip out elements and sequence them across your track. And the thing Adam Ellis always says with his production is you want to get each element done throughout the entire track. That way you're not coming back to it, and that way each thing is professional. Because and he's really right about this. Like when you do this, when you sequence your track and you have the mentality of, okay, I'll do everything, and you kind of throw everything together and you don't do it step by step, you think you'll come back to it, and then you never come back to it, and then it's like really annoying, because then you're like, why does my track sound like shit? Well, it's like not any part of it is necessarily 100%. So that's why it's like super, 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 super important that you get each element done sounding professionally to the point you want, because if you keep adding together a bunch of things that are, 80% done, 80% done, 80% done, by the time you think you're finished with 100% of the elements of your track, you're only going to have 80% of the quality. So that's why the kick and bass is probably the most important part, and then of course your percussion, you want to make sure that this is just, really, really having a lot of groove and having a lot of stuff that's going on here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start sequencing these, the groove here. So one of the things I'm going to do first is probably get this clap. So once again, have this pattern here, have this all set up with my template, but don't actually have a sample here, which is, I think, a good thing to do. You don't want to necessarily just be using the same samples every time. So there's always a ton of great stuff you can find for these samples. Maybe try this Drift Moon pack, has probably some great stuff. So here's some clap. So I actually like some of these longer, more reverbed claps. So I'm going to start with this guy. And one of the things, sometimes these sample pack guys, they try to make it nice to the level that you want it. But since I'm always mixing it anyway, I always normalize it. And I'm going to trim off just the silence there, just because, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So now is what I'm doing is using the envelope here to kind of shape the tone of this clap and have the length that I want. So that sounds good to me, and I might layer that with something maybe like a standard 909 clap, something with a little bit more attack. And this is what I'm going to do, is I kind of have this set up with this EQ. I'm just going to take out some of the low mids. So this is with that second clap. And without it, so you can hear. It really does, to me, add a lot of difference, add, some of the high end there. So I'm going to keep that there. And yeah, that sounds pretty good. And one of the things I like doing is really putting a little bit of ambience on these claps, because I think they can sound a little dry without it. So when I set up my template, I use kind of 3 reverbs. I use sort of like an ambience, a medium verb, and then like a huge reverb for like effects and like wonky stuff. And with this, maybe I would use the ambience, maybe I'd use the medium. I may start with the medium verb, and we'll see what that sounds like. So this is the first clap. Let me actually solo this. So I'm actually going to do is loop these 8 bars and kind of start building up the groove from here. So I thought this medium verb initially was just a little bit too long to really be super useful there. In fact, 10 seconds is a lot for a medium verb. So what's on this channel is just all vintage verb, and I have this setting that I use for what I consider to be an ambience. In fact, the mode is even set on ambience, and just have the mix up to 100% and the decay about a second or less, and then really taking out a lot of the highs, and then of course this parametric EQ to take out the lows and tame some of the highs if there are anything, because if there is going to be something taking up all that information, high frequency information, hopefully it wouldn't be reverb. So that's why I kind of have that there. So this point maybe is what I'll do, and like I said, I'm just going through these random packs, is get sort of like an open hat, and I like using just like a standard like 909 open hat. I think that sounds really good. Sometimes it's cool to add like a phaser or flanger to it to give it some character, but I don't think, I mean, I like using a lot of different samples and stuff, but I like kind of keeping the open hat within the spirit of what I would consider to be the genre, so that's kind of where I'm coming from there. So hopefully we'll find some in here. Let's see, maybe there is something, and here's an open hat. That's actually pretty nice, so if I just go ahead and add this in, and now I need to mix it. In fact, I have something I want to see. Auto name channels. That's what's going on here, is it's renaming them to this name of the sample, which bothers me because I don't like it when it does that. This is clap 2. This is clap 1. And one of the things I'll probably do with these claps, actually, pan them left and right and just kind of give it a little bit of stereo image, and just kind of make it interesting, keep it different, spread it out a little bit. Let's see what's going on with this open hat. And maybe another thing I'll add on to here is the mag EQ4. I think having this on the open hat is really nice, especially with this air band. So what I'm going to do is turn this high shelf up to about 40 kilohertz and then start bumping up the air gain. And since this is at 40 kilohertz and the upper end of human hearing is only 20, probably going to have to boost this at least to 5 or something, just to kind of really actually hear the effect of this. But to me, this adds a lot of sparkle and sheen without getting too harsh. So that's with it. And then of course without it, so I think with it just adds a little bit of high end, a little bit of sparkle, really nice sort of, I don't know, just really nice kind of sheen to it. Oops, out of here. Cool. So yeah. And maybe at this point here I'll give it a little bit of the small reverb as well. So to me, what that really does, rather than necessarily giving it a huge tail, is it helps spread it across the stereo field. Now, I've panned this open hat to the left a little bit, and the reason I do that is I also like having a ride cymbal on the offbeats as well sometimes, and that I'll usually pan in the opposite direction. So if I'm panning the open hat here to the left, 20% or whatever, maybe I'll pan this to the right 25%, and that way, once again, you're getting different information across the stereo field in addition to the frequency range. So yeah, and that'll actually be the next thing I'll take a look at, is going to be getting this ride here. So let's go ahead and see if I can find one. Now you're probably wondering why I'm looking at open hats for a ride cymbal, and the reason for that is because a lot of sample packs and producers consider rides to be open hats, and it kind of makes sense because in genres like trance or techno, what's really going on here is it's used in very similar way that an open hat would be on the offbeats. So seeing it there isn't too much of a surprise. That's actually really nice. That's exactly the sound I'm looking for. So number 3 here. So once again, this auto rename keeps it from getting renamed. So now you can hear the ride with the open hats. So one of the ways I find effective to mix something like this is bringing the fader all the way down and then slowly bringing it up. And one of the things is I think this might be a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do is go into the sample properties of the ride cymbal and play around with this volume envelope up until it gets to the point that I think it has a nice sort of the sort of length that I'm like looking for. And while I'm at it, oh good, this is already set to cut self. So what this is doing is this is making sure that the tail of the sound doesn't wash over the initial transient. So what this means is when the sample triggers again, so this note's going to play, right? And it's going to play the sample, but as soon as this one hits, it's going to cut off this one playing. So only one can be playing at the same time. That way you don't get any weird sort of volume spikes or build-ups. And for drums, this is really important because you don't want the transient of the hit to be washed over by the tail or anything that happens afterwards. So that's kind of why I have that set up that way. Another thing that I'm noticing is I think this clap has a little bit more low mid-end than I'd like it to have. So take a listen. So I think that sounds a little bit better, just taming down the low mid area a little bit and cutting out some of the lows that aren't really benefiting to the sound anyway. And this is a common pattern. I mean, you'll see me and you'll see a lot of other producers be doing this where you're really cutting out a lot of the low end below 100, 200, even more than that many hertz. So that way, the only thing that's taking up your low frequency is your kick and your sub bass. And I might send this to the reverb, the medium verb actually, to just kind of really wash it over. And one of the things Drift Moon kind of does and recommends is actually automating the amount that the ride is sent to your reverb over time to kind of push it back in the mix. And that's something reverb can do. So I like thinking about mixing sort of like a director where you have like your frame, right? So you have your frame and you have low frequencies to high frequencies that you want to fill. You have left and right being your stereo field, and then you have depth. So one of the ways you can create depth, because if you have something that's really big in the forefront of your frame, then something behind it may be obscured. So if something's really loud, which is like its size, it's going to be really big and you won't have room for everything else. But another way you can push things sort of back, in addition to kind of having it be smaller in the background, is you can change the focus if you're doing filming. And I like to think of reverb as changing the focus. So by adding reverb is what you're doing. You're blurring the sound. I mean, that's literally what you're doing to it, is you're adding blur to it, you're adding reflections to it that bounce it around and really blur over the sound. And in some ways that kind of pushes it back because your eyes are going to be drawn in a picture or in a movie to what's in focus, and similarly your ears are going to be drawn towards the thing that are close by or not washed in reverb. So that's kind of my 2 cents. So pushing this ride back so that the open hat is really taking care of the initial transient and providing the body of the upper end of the offbeats, whereas this ride is going to be sort of pushed back a little bit. So I like that a lot. And another thing I will probably do at this point is I might add a little bit of sidechain to this open hat using Xverse LFO tool. And the reason I like doing this is if I'm going for a more techier vibe, like tech trance or techno or something like that, I think having this can really help create that drive that you'd hear in tracks like from some of the guys like Mark Sherry. You'll hear like these sidechained hats a lot, sidechain rides. So there we go with that, and one of the things I may do, turn down this percussion bus a little bit, that way the kick and sub are really cutting through. And another thing I'm going to do is add a little bit more transient to this open hat. The way that I'm going to do this is by fading out the sample, that way the initial it's a little bit shorter. And this ride I may have a little bit more high end than I may want it to have. So that peak was bothering me. And maybe I'll come back to these claps later, but at this point I think is what I want to do. And let me see, is anybody... Nope, nobody's chatting me on Twitch. Whoops. I don't know why this pulls up every time, really annoying. Anyway, next thing probably is what I'll do is work on getting these closed hats. So what I'm going to do is add first closed hats and find a nice sample for it. And, closed hats and these sorts of things, of course you can sample them, you can create them yourself with white noise, and I've done that a lot. In fact, some of the sample packs that I've made for either the class I was teaching in music production or just in general are often made with that or some combination of that, and that's how a lot of times these were made in the old drum machines like the Roland TR-909 and TR-808, so that's like one option. But you can also find sample, find something cool. That's nice, actually. I like that a lot. So with this is what I'm going to do is create a very simple sort of one bar pattern. And the important thing here is playing around with the velocities to really kind of give it some variety and kind of give it some groove. So I like taking the volume down to the first two hits a lot because that's kind of like a natural, what I would consider to be a natural side chain. And then after this, it'll kind of come up, hit with and provide a little bit more attack to the open hat, and then kind of come down towards the end. And at this point is what I will do is go ahead and duplicate this to be the whole 8 bars. Now if this was like trap or something where these hi-hats were like a really big focus in the track, I would try to add more variety, but really is what I'm going for here is really to add drive. So that's why kind of having it be a little bit repetitive and maybe almost monotonous can be a nice thing. And one of the cool things you can do in FL Studio is if I go to the note pan, I can go to this randomize, and don't want to really randomize anything but the panning. So what this is going to randomly do is it's going to randomly pan each note a little bit and provide a little bit of stereo image across each note. Now there are other ways you can do this, such as adding, which I guess would be like a tremolo or an auto pan that pans it left and right. But I find this to be interesting because it's a little bit more erratic and random. So you can do this and then add, add an auto pan in addition. That way it's not only bouncing across in a rhythmic way, but it's like adding a little bit of noise, so to speak, there. So let's take a listen. And that sounds good. So what I'm going to do is add another closed hat at this point, and I'm going to make this a new pattern. That way I can kind of fade these in separately or add them into different points of the song. And maybe what I'll do with this is just do the last 2 beats of each bar. So something like this. And this is where, maybe to keep things interesting, I will add a few notes here and there that aren't on the offbeats. But first, let me go ahead and mix this level with the other things. Something like that, keep things interesting. And yeah, that's kind of the basics of getting these hats down. And probably the next thing I'll do at this point, and rather than keeping this video from being like way too long, is I will add maybe a loop or 2. Now I usually have space for 3 kind of chopped up loops, and usually I use all 3, and then I end up adding more tracks. But because I'm getting so close to running into this track limit here with FL Studio, because they're not dynamically allocated, I kind of wait to see if I really am going to use that, because I also end up probably using more than however many atmospheres I have, 8 or 7. So pretty common. So I try to keep those tracks to be flexible, but after a certain point you do kind of get diminishing returns with adding an extra loop versus adding an extra loop. So I'm going to create a pattern for this loop, and this is kind of the way that I've always done it. And I'm going to add the pattern here, where we're creating stuff. And I'm just going to find a loop that has sounds that I like. And rather than just kind of ripping this loop straight off and dragging it into the track, which is something, I can totally do, I'm going to try to almost in some ways create my own drum kit out of it and create my own loop. And that way I have control over what drum hits get added and really create a groove. So these full loops, I don't like using them because they have a kick and maybe clap and other things. But I'm looking for these strip loops or percussion loops. I think those have a lot more interesting parts you can work with. So and the tempo doesn't matter, because since we're going to be chopping this up, really isn't that big of a deal. So I like this one a lot. I think it's really unique, really interesting sound. I'm going to right click, actually rather than doing that, because that's not a good idea, I'm just going to straight up drag it into this Slice channel. Now what it's done is it's actually mapped the entire loop to middle C. Where's middle? But I don't want to do that, so I'm going to auto slice it. So what it's going to do is just detect the transients, and it's probably going to give each 16th note its own thing. So now is what I can do is play this across the keyboard. This loop is now kind of its own drum loop. So if I sequence the loop the way it normally was, it will sound like this. But what I want to do, rather than just playing the loop straight away, is play around with it. So that sound, for instance, rather than using it again, maybe trying to make this a little bit. So that sounds pretty good, and one of the things I'll probably do is add LFO tool to this channel on its own. And I want to take some of the lows out of here as well. And to give this some even more movement, maybe what I'll do is add a flanger or fling or phaser. There are all sorts of stuff. FL comes with a bunch of good ones, but there's all sorts of wacky stuff. And maybe I'll just do moving. So that's a little bit too much, and I think it's a little too fast, but that's kind of the effect that I'm going for, just creating movement. And maybe another thing that would be interesting to add is a little bit of delay. Just kind of bounce this loop around. So what this offset knob is doing is it's delaying the time between the left and right samples. By doing this, this creates sort of some stereo image, but by doing that, you always want to make sure you check your mix in mono or the channel in mono. Make sure you're not getting any weird phasing issues. I think that sounds pretty good. Cool, so I'm happy with that. So today is what I've done is really just kind of gone from this track, not really having anything besides, a melody idea, and started building this groove at bar 33, and there's definitely some more work that needs to be done. I'm going to be adding some auxiliary percussion hits, things like toms and bills to really help space out the groove, and then a few more loops I think would really help it. Chopping them up and playing around with them, kind of like we did here, kind of create your own pattern with them. But I'm happy with that. So one of the things now is what I'm going to do is shift gears and start working on beat making. So if you're not interested in that at all, I guess you can leave, and if you are interested in that, hopefully now would be the time to do it. So like I mentioned, I want this channel to be kind of a hybrid of electronic music production and then beat making. So that way there's a little bit of something for everyone. Now I'm not really sure how to do that on Twitch because I was thinking about having 2 separate channels, but things get tricky, so open to suggestions. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start from a template that I have set up for this. Now, as this is loading, one of the things I do want to mention is making a beat, either whether it be a trap beat or kind of another type of hip-hop beat. The production that you do with this is actually going to be, I don't want to say it's a lot simpler, but it's going to be a lot more, there's going to be a lot fewer tracks and a lot fewer instruments that you're going to see me using. So, whereas in this other channel I was getting close to hitting the track count, here in this channel, I barely even use, 20 mixer tracks, and this has more percussion than I'd probably ever expect to be using, ever. So to kind of walk, maybe I'll just get started cracking, and if you guys have a question, oh, cool. Someone chatted me. But yeah, so if you guys do have a question or want to see kind of the way I went through this template, in fact, actually, rather than doing that, I do have a YouTube video that I talk about where I made this exact template, kind of how I did it, and what I think are the best practices and what to think about when making this template, because it is, a lot, I think with this it ends up being a little bit more organic because the structure of the songs can be more organic, and that's why not as much is set in stone. As you can see, I don't have really any automation layers. Maybe I should have, master filters, all sorts of stuff like that. But, yeah, let's get going. So, when I make beats, probably 50% of the time I use a sample. I start with a sample, something from Splice, or from a record, or something like that. And the other half of the time I do something completely from scratch. And today what I want to do is just maybe try doing something from a sample, because it'll come together a little bit quicker, and I think, I don't know, I'm just in the mood to do that. So, it just depends. And there's a lot of great stuff out there that you can find, so don't feel bad about using samples. I used to feel really bad about it, and then I stopped feeling bad about it. So, I'm just going down to my Splice folder, and I'm going to look for something that, looks cool. I'm wondering if this is only these 2 notes or if there's something else. The way to find that out is to... So in this template I already have it set up so that I have a sample channel. I'm going to just drag it here. And this is a little bit too sharp, so I'm going to turn this to dull auto slicing. I like this a lot, and I actually feel like this would be interesting if this really got played around with. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag this in here. Now it thinks the tempo of this is 160. Now what if I took this, and what I'm thinking is really kind of slowing this down and stretching it out. So one of the ways I can do this is just taking the stretch thing, and let's say I just drag this out to 16 bars. So that, compared to what it originally was, really kind of getting a gritty, like old school feel to this. So I took this sample that was in F and moved it down 8 semitones. Now, so it's like super, super deep and super brooding, and this could, be potentially be a really sad song. And now what I'm going to do is I'll probably load a battery and use this to kind of get just a basic drum kit going, and just start sequencing some drums. In fact, it's so funny, I don't usually use battery for these kinds of things, but I'm kind of feeling like finding a kit in here that I like working with, or at least a few samples, and then going from there. So maybe something like, you know what? No one has time for this shit. So rather than something like that, which that kind of, this would be more of like a trap kit, maybe what I'll do is try to find something a little bit more punchy and dirty sound. Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice. Let's see. Go ahead and put a kick on this thing, and then maybe I'll get a boom bat sort of snare or clap. Kind of like these that have a little bit more of a lower body to them. So, and actually, before laying these patterns, I actually like laying the snare or the clap if I'm doing trap first on the offbeats, because that helps me get a feel for what the rhythm is going to be. So. Oh, come on, man. So I like this clap, but it's not like meaty enough. So what I may try to do is find something like Camel Crusher or Camel Space to really kind of clamp down on this guy. slow this down a little bit more because I think this might be a little fast. This is more what I'm looking for. So I'm liking that. That's nice. So when recording like that, usually is what I find is that it ends up being, I don't know, a little bit too, I don't always hit the notes at the right time, so that's what quantization is for. Mac, it's Command Q. Oh, it's still scanning. So once again, I think this kick could definitely use a little bit of meatiness, so I'm going to try to find Camel Crusher again. And I find that this plugin works really well to kind of really gritty up these sounds. And I'm probably going to end up using this compressor that I really like a lot to help kind of get that initial transient and help the body of that come out a little bit more. So I like having these crashes here, but I don't know if this 808 crash is really the most appropriate for the kind of vibe that we're going for here. So maybe what I'll try to find is some sort of
keep following. Listen.
So the length here is not perfect. So I'm probably going to actually stretch this out until these delays are hitting. So this guy, I'm noticing this loop is a little too loud. So let's crash. And maybe we don't need all these sends right now. I like that a lot. So taking this F minor and pitching this down by, what is this, 8 semitones? Is that right? Doesn't seem right. No, because it's going, okay, so the reason that this C minor, note to me works really well is because what's probably going on is this is now in, this originally was an F minor, but the minor third in F minor is G sharp. So what's going on here is that gets pitched down where that G sharp is now a C, and then this vocal sample may actually end up sounding pretty darn good. So let's take a listen. So that's obviously not sounding. So what I'm going to do is automate the volume on this guy and kind of fade it out a little bit. And of course our best friend in this case is going to be Mr. Reverb to help push this back a little bit and keep that tail from sounding like too much booty. And I think there's a little bit too much high end here on this crash.
Just wanna see you driving until the sun comes.
So one of the things that I think is really inspiring is finding sounds from different almost different genres. So some of these vocal atmospheres, which I would definitely use in a trance track, which I always do, may fit really well in here. This 8 semitone down. So if this is 8 semitones, 1, 2, 3, 4. This should be in like A sharp. So anything around there, and that can be pitched around, may sound pretty good. Maybe let's take a listen. So maybe when starting this, the first 8 bars, and this is a simple arrangement. No kick, no snare, just. So what's going on here is there's a filter closing with a ton of resonance on it, and it's picking up a number of these peaks here in the mid-range. So what I want to do here is, and we'll see when this comes in. Hear that? So I don't really like that too much, so I'm probably going to dip it out. So maybe what I'll end up doing is adding some sort of like keys, maybe like a electric piano. I don't know. So I like the idea. So I like the idea of having keys, but I don't know if these are the right ones. Maybe with enough delay and reverb on it, because this song just seems like getting this super reverby drenched vibe. So I think is what I'm thinking now is create sort of like an atmospheres bus for all of these guys. Whoops, shit. And the reason I want to do this is I kind of want to sidechain this to the kick to kind of give it a little bit more bounciness. So what I'm going to do, route the kick over here, but without any audio. And sidechain from the kick. We'll see. someone's saying to use gross speed to try, half speed on the sample, and I think at this point it might be slow, but it's worth a try. Let's go ahead and see if that's actually something that sounds good. It might be slowed down that much. There's another program by Cable Guys called Halftime which does that, but gross speed gives you a lot more flexibility. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what that would sound like. So this is to 22. Okay, here it is. I'm just gonna go ahead and call this like melodic. It sounds like a guitar, but I don't know what it is. Let's go ahead and try. Yeah, gross speed's a good idea. So I think it would be here. Nope. I actually really like that, and I think using this as an automation, different parts of the song can come in with this on. It would sound really cool. So you can hear how the kick is kind of sidechained. That might be a little bit too pronounced. Let's see if maybe. So what I'm thinking about is getting, a few more like these atmospheric vocal samples and really stretching them across the rest of the track, bringing a couple in. That way it's always evolving and it's always something new and different. But obviously this is like super brooding and super sort of, I don't know, just kind of emotional would be the word that I'm looking for. So maybe what I'll do now is try to get some sort of hi-hat pattern going, get a little bit more energy, keep it from sounding too depressing. It's kind of nice. I think that would fit what we're going for here with this vibe. Whoops. So one of the things you'll notice, right off the bat here is this just sounds super repetitive and super robotic. So we want to go ahead and humanize this. So there are a couple ways to do this. One of the ways is to just go ahead and quantize this to, maybe something like a sort of swing. What the heck? And the reason it's not picking this up is that these guys are really actually quarter notes, so it's kind of. And one of the things to really accent this is I'm going to scale, it's not really working. I want to scale these levels around, and maybe I'll add a little bit of randomness into the velocities, like we did before. That's not what that is. And yeah, and then after that I'll probably sign off. But let's go ahead and if I go to randomize, here we'll go ahead and randomize the panning maybe a little bit, and velocity is the one I'm really going for. And what I'm really trying to go for is sort of like these guys kind of hitting like that, but unfortunately, and I know there's a good way to do this, because these aren't really eighth notes. Yeah, a little bit of swing. I like that. Anyway, from there, I think is what I'll do is I'll leave it at that. And if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to just send me a message or something. And yeah, I'll be around. See ya.